So I wanted to start the conversation with your recent trip to Latin America. I just heard you were in Latin America and you were in Mexico this Monday and this weekend. How was it? Just a general statement.
I was in Mexico City, which is it's a very pleasant city in many ways, but it's a vibrant, lively, exciting society, but also very depressing in other ways, and sometimes almost hopeless, So it's a combination of vibrancy and I wouldn't say despair, but hopelessness. Doesn't have to be, but it is. I mean, there's almost no economy.
And you went there specifically for the anniversary of La Jornada. La
Jornada, which is, in my opinion, the one independent newspaper in the whole hemisphere.
Yeah.
And amazingly successful. So it's now the second largest newspaper in Mexico and has very close to the first. It's completely boycotted by advertisers. So when you read I have a copy of it here, but if you just thumb through it, there's no ads. Not because they refuse them, but because business won't advertise. Now they have notices, so announcements of a meeting, they have government notices, but that's only because the Constitution requires it. But they're essentially boycotted. But nevertheless, they survive and flourish.
What do you think it's their success? Why do you think it's successful?
I couldn't figure that out, and I'm not sure they know. But it's amazingly successful, and of course it's extremely unusual because all media depend on advertising to survive. And it's also independent. I mean, I was there for only 4 days, but I must have picked up half a dozen articles that don't appear in the international press and that are important.
I'm gonna make a general summary of some of your work. You say, because media is a business which has to create profits, it answers to the market demands and its investors more than to the integrity of the news. It constrains its contents to what is acceptable within the limits of capitalist ideology, promoting the capitalist agenda and values throughout society. It maintains social order, conformance, and unquestionable consumerism as our roles in life. And as the corporations that control media conglomerate and have larger access to the market, they further limit information and debate to what is within the interests of even fewer powerful people. Do you see media engaging in some sort of soft mind control, or will this be too strong of a statement?
Well, first of all, I think that's a bit too narrow because they also conform very almost stupendously to state interests. And the state system and the corporate system are close. They're not identical, And also we have to recognize that there's a range of interests. Like there isn't a single corporate interest and a single state interest. So there's a range. And in addition to that, there is the fact of professional integrity. I mean, a lot of the people involved in the media are very serious, honest people. And they will tell you, and I think they're right, that they are not being forced to write anything.
They're
what they believe in. What they don't tell you and are maybe unaware of is that they are allowed to write freely because they conform. Their beliefs conform to the to the standard doctrinal system. And then, yes, they're allowed to write freely and they're not coerced. People who don't accept that doctrinal system, they may try to survive in the media, but they're unlikely to. So there's a range, but there's a kind of a fundamental conformity, which is a virtual requirement to enter into the media. Now, it's not a totalitarian society, so there's exceptions. You can find exceptions. Furthermore, the media are not very different from the universities in this respect. So it's really there's there's an effect of advertising, corporate ownership, subordinates to state. There's an effect. But it's really, these are really, to a large extent, comments on the dominant intellectual culture. You don't...
so you think it's more like the values people hold influence this?
Well, the whole intellectual culture has a filtering system. It starts as a child in school. You're expected to accept certain beliefs, styles, behavior patterns, and so on. If you don't accept them, you're called maybe a behavior problem or something, and you're weeded out. And that something like that goes on all the way through universities and graduate schools. There's an implicit system of filtering which has creates a strong tendency to impose conformism. Now, it's a tendency, so you do have exceptions, and sometimes the exceptions are quite striking. So take, say, this university. In the 1960s, period of 60s activism, the university was about 100% funded by the Pentagon. But it was also probably the main academic center of anti-war resistance. I mean, not protest.
Yeah, you saw a Lockheed Martin office.
There was a Lockheed office. There wasn't at that time. It's become more corporate since. That's defense industry, military industry. But at that time, it was straight Pentagon funding. In fact, I was in a lab that was 100% funded by the Pentagon, and it was one of the centers of the organized anti-war resistance movement.
So you do say there's a window of opportunity for resistance.
There's a range of possibilities. It has limits, but and the tendencies are quite strong, and there are rewards for conformity are quite high, and the punishments for non-conformity can be significant. It's not like where you're sent to a torture chamber, but
more like lifestyle and how things limit you to certain.
You can be. It can affect advancement. It can affect even employment. It can affect the way you're treated. Disparagement, dismissal as slander or denunciations. There's a range of. This is true of every society.
So you think it's like ingrained in our culture, kind of?
No, it's every society. I don't know of any society that's throughout history that's been unlike it. I mean, go back to classical times. Say classical Greece. Who drank the hemlock? Was it someone who was conforming, obeying the gods? Or was it someone who was disrupting the youth and questioning faith and belief? Socrates, in other words. Yeah, it was Socrates. Or go back to the Bible, in the Old Testament. I mean, there were people who we would call intellectuals. They're called prophets. But they're basically intellectuals. They're people who were doing critical geopolitical analysis, talking about the decisions of the king were going to lead to destruction, condemning immorality, calling for justice for widows and orphans, what we would call dissident intellectuals. Were they nicely treated? No. They were driven into the desert. They were imprisoned. They were denounced. There were intellectuals who conformed. Centuries later, say in the Gospels, they're called false prophets. But not at the time. They were the ones who were welcomed and well treated at the time, the flatterers at the court. And I don't know, I know of almost no society since that's different from that. There's variation, of course, but that basic pattern persists, and it's completely understandable. I mean, sectors of power are not going to favor the flourishing of dissidents. The same reason why businesses won't advertise in La Jornada.
Do you think we could break that pattern?
It's been broken to an extent, so we don't live in tyrannies. The king doesn't decide what's legitimate. And there's much more freedom than there was in the past. So yes, these patterns can be modified, but as long as you have concentration of power in one form or another, whether it's arms or capital or something else, when you have concentration of power, these are consequences that you almost automatically expect. As I say, there are exceptions. And it's interesting to see the exceptions. So take Europe, or the West altogether. I know of only one country, at least to my knowledge, which has a dissident culture where leading figures, I mean, the most famous writers, journalists, academics, and so on, are not only critical of state policy, but are constantly carrying out civil disobedience and risking imprisonment and often being imprisoned, standing up for people's rights. That's Turkey. Now, in Western Europe, Turkey is regarded as uncivilized, so they can't bring them into the European Union until they civilize them. Mm-hmm. I think it's the other way around. If Europe could achieve the level of civilization of, say, Turkish intellectuals, it would be quite an achievement.
You have written that if the public have their own independent sources of information...
That who?
The public?
Public.
The official line of the government and the corporate class will be doubted. According to a Pew Research Center study, only 29% of Americans say the news organizations generally get a hat straight. Yet twice as many saying the press was liberal than conservative, which has led to more divisions among people and distrust among each other.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I think the press, by and large, is what we call liberal. Mm. But, of course, what we call liberal means well to the right. Uh-huh. You know, liberal means the guardians at the gates. So the New York Times is liberal by what's called, but by the standards of political discourse. New York Times is liberal, CBS is liberal. I don't disagree. I think they're moderately critical at the fringes. They're not totally subordinate to power, but they're very strict in how far you can go. And in fact, the liberalism serves an extremely important function in supporting power. It's saying, I'm the guardian at the gates, you can go this far, but no further. So take a major issue, like, say, the invasion of Vietnam. Well, no liberal newspaper ever talked about the invasion of Vietnam. They talked about the defense of Vietnam. And then they were saying, well, it's not going well. Okay, that made them liberal. It's as if we were to say that, going back to, say, Nazi Germany, that Hitler's general staff was liberal after Stalingrad because they were criticizing his tactics. This is a mistake to fight a two-front war. We should have knocked off England first or something. Okay, that's what we call liberalism, saying, well, it's not going well. So maybe it's costing us too much. Some may say even maybe we're killing too many people, but that's called liberal. So take, let's say, Obama. He's called liberal, and he's praised for his principled objection to the Iraq War. What was his principled objection? He said it's a strategic blunder, like Nazi generals after Stalingrad. Okay, well, that's what...
Not the war itself, but...
Not there's something wrong with it, but it's a strategic blunder. We should have done it, should have done some other thing. Like we shouldn't have fought a two-front war if you're on the German general staff. Or, take, say, Pravda in the 1980s. I mean, you could read things in Pravda saying it was a stupid error to invade Afghanistan. It was a dumb thing to do. We ought to get out. It's costing us too much. I mean, the U.S., an analog of that would be extreme liberalism. And it's been pretty well studied. So let's say the Vietnam War went on for a long time. We have a ton of material. What was called the extreme critique of the war, say right at the war's end. You go to what's called the far left in the media, maybe Anthony Lewis in the New York Times, outspoken liberal, the extreme. He summed up the war in 1975 by saying the U.S. entered South Vietnam with I think his phrase was, blundering efforts to do good. To do good is tautological. Our government did it, so therefore, by definition, it was to do good. He didn't try to give evidence for that. He just said, well, it's because it's tautology. It's like saying 2 + 2 = 4. So we entered, and blundering, it didn't work out well. So we entered with blundering efforts to do good. But by 1969, it was becoming clear that it was a disaster too costly to ourselves. We could not bring democracy and freedom to Vietnam at a cost acceptable to ourselves. The idea that that's what we were trying to do is, again, a tautology. It's true by definition because we were doing it, and the state is noble by definition. That's called extreme liberalism.
So you're saying that papers like the New York Times
They're liberal.
The liberal side for the general public.
They're liberal by our conventional standards of liberalism.
But that means that if twice as many people are saying that these are too liberal,
they're right. No, they're right. That's not what they mean. See, that's not what the people mean who are answering the question. That's why I would agree with them, but with a different interpretation. I'm saying what's called liberal in the intellectual culture means highly conformist to power, but mildly critical. Like, say, Pravda in the 1980s, or the German General Staff after Stalingrad. Highly conformist to power, but critical, maybe even sharply critical, because it's making a mistake, or it's costing us too much, or the wrong thing to do, or something. Yeah, that's liberal. That's what we call liberal. But when the people who are answering that question mean something else.
Yeah, what
they mean probably, the polls don't really inquire, so we don't know. But guessing, my guess would be that what they mean is they're referring to their lifestyle choices. So, like they accept abortion, they're not religious, they live more or less a free lifestyle, not traditional families. They believe in gay rights and so on. What the polls don't tell you is, though other polls do, is that if you do a study of CEOs, top executives in corporations, they're liberal. Their attitudes on these matters are about the same as the press.
Do you think...
And incidentally, if you listen to the talk shows, which are rabid right-wing, and very interesting, and an important fact about the United States, they reach a huge audience, and they're very uniform. So right-wing, I don't think you can find an analog in Europe. But they're reach a mass audience, and their view is that the corporations are liberal. Part of their appeal to the population is the country's run by liberals. They own the corporations, they run the government, they own the media, and they don't care about us ordinary people. And there's an analog to this, late Weimar Republic. It's very reminiscent of the late Weimar Republic. And this mass appeal has its similarities to Nazi propaganda. And I'm not, in an important, there are a lot of differences, but there's a very important sense in which it's similar. They are reaching out to a population of people with real grievances. The grievances are not invented. In the United States, in Weimar Germany, it was...
So that was my question. If these people distrust, they might have a healthy distrust of the media, but they can, do you think, be manipulated by other extreme interests?
Well, I really suggest listening to talk radio. I mean, if you just listen to what the talk masters are saying, it sounds like they're lunatics.
And they have so much coverage in the mainstream.
Put aside your disbelief and just listen to it. Put yourself in the position of a person, sort of an ordinary American. I'm a hardworking, God-fearing Christian. I take care of my family. I go to church. I do everything right. And I'm getting shafted For the last 30 years, my income has stagnated. My working hours are going up. My benefits are going down. My wife has to work too to put food on the table. The children, there's no care for the children. The schools are rotten and so on. What did I do wrong? I did everything you're supposed to do, but something's going wrong to me. Now, the talk show hosts nobody has an answer. There is an answer.
But they address their grievances.
Well, the answer is, the neoliberal remaking of the economy, among other things. But nobody's giving them that answer. Not the media, certainly, because they don't see it that way. They're doing fine. Like, say, Anthony Lewis, again, the way Left End describes the last 30 years as the golden age of American capitalism. Well, it was for him and his friends, and for me. People at our income level are doing fine. Like, there's complaints about health care. Yeah, I get terrific health care.
You work in the university. You work in the university, so.
Well,
Is it?
Time's just about up.
Yeah, healthcare.
Can I finish with some questions?
Yeah, well, just finish with it.
2 minutes.
Healthcare is rationed by wealth. And the people Anthony Lewis meets for dinner in a restaurant and his friends and so on, yeah, for them it's fine. But not for the people who are listening to the talk shows. And that's a large part of the population. In fact, for a majority of the population, wages and incomes have stagnated and conditions have gotten worse. So they're asking, what did I do wrong? And the answer that the talk show host is giving them is convincing in its internal logic. It's saying what's wrong is the rich liberals own everything, run everything, they don't care about you, therefore distrust them and so on. What did Hitler say? It's the same thing, except it's the Jews, it's the Bolsheviks.
He was scapegoating.
That's an answer. Yeah. Okay, it is an answer internal to it, and it has an internal logic. Maybe insane, but has an internal logic.
One last question. Going from there and to counteract this, I guess, right-wing
populism.
Yeah, populism.
That's what it is.
Yeah. You said that to build a movement, media should be involved in building a movement. This is my statement, not yours. But to build a movement, you need broad-based appeal. A genuine radical culture can be created only through the spiritual transformation of great masses of people, the essential feature of any social revolution, that is to extend the possibilities of human creativity and freedom. How can alternative media like Amauta push itself in building this broad-based appeal and go beyond just preaching to the choir? Because I feel that a lot of our media, I read certain things. I read La Jornada, but do people like me read La Jornada only, or do other people read La Jornada? They don't like to be challenged.
La Jornada is much more widely read. Like, you can go down the streets and see somebody sitting at a bar and reading it. But just media alone is not enough. You have to have organization. So take Mexico. I don't claim to know a lot about Mexico, but I did talk to quite a number of left Mexican intellectuals, and they all said the same thing, that there's a lot of popular kind of concern and activism, but it's very fragmented, that the groups have very specific, narrow agendas, and they don't interact and cooperate with one another. Okay, that's something you have to overcome to build a mass popular movement. And media can help, but they also benefit from it. So you're right, unless that happens, unless you get, kind of integration of activist concerns and movements, each one will be preaching to the choir.
So you think we have to involve people to get in active participation in this?
It takes organization. Organization and education interact with each other. They strengthen each other. They're mutually supportive.
How would you envision having a network of people from all parts of society, but mostly the majority that needs to take their voice back, becoming expert themselves as citizen journalists or artists while holding each other accountable in the newsmaking process?
A lot of ways to do it. I'll leave, but I'll give you just one practical example. many others. I was in Brazil about 15 years ago, and I traveled around at the time with Lula a lot. He was, not
the president.
He took me once to a big suburb outside of Rio de Janeiro, a couple of million people, poor suburb, and it has a big kind of, open space, kind of plaza outside. It's a semi-tropical country, so everybody's outside. It's in the evening. A small group of journalists from Rio, professionals, come out in the evening with a truck, park it in the middle of the plaza. It has a screen above it, and broadcasting equipment. And what they're broadcasting is skits written by people in the community, acted and directed by people in the community. So local people are presenting the skits. One of the actresses, a girl maybe 17, was walking around the crowd with a microphone, asking people to come. A lot of people were there and they were interested. They were watching, people sitting in the bars, people milling around in the space. So they commented on what they saw, and what they said was, it was a television screen behind, so they displayed what the person said, and then other people commented on that. And the skits were significant. I don't know Portuguese, but I could follow them more or less.
You see this as an active participation in this movement?
They were about serious. Some of it was just comedy, but some of it was, about the debt crisis or about AIDS.
But it allows a space for creativity, for people,
direct
for
participation
human.
and creativity. No, that was a pretty imaginative thing to do, I think. I don't know if it still goes on, but it's one of many possible models.
Well, thank you very much. I know your time is limited. Can I take a picture very quickly? Just for journalistic purposes. Like this. I don't have. Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. And thank you very much.